I'm Frank Partnoy, and this is a balance sheet. It is a real balance sheet of an actual company. Who is it? Well, let's look at it. 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, we know what happened in those years. Company starts off strong, lots of assets, plenty of equity. 2007, tough year, still looks good, rock solid. 2008, very tough year, looks great. 2009, rockin' year in the markets. This is a stable company. Who is this? Do you know? I'm a professor, so I get to ask questions. Do you know who it is? Is this McDonald's? Is this a stable company that somehow survived the crisis? Do you know? Citigroup. This is the actual balance sheet of Citigroup. I want to talk about off-balance sheet transactions, what's not here. This is a company that went from a market capitalization of $250 billion to virtually zero. This is a company that went from making tens of billions of dollars a year to losing tens of billions of dollars a year. This is a company that required the government to ring-fence $306 billion of its liabilities in its own off-balance sheet transaction. And that's the picture of this company according to the balance sheet. What one word describes Citigroup's balance sheet? I'll use a different F word, fiction instead of fraud. The balance sheet is not a trivial document. It's a document that regulators rely on. It's a document that is the source of information for Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital. It's a document that regulations depend on. It's a document that investors look to. And it is a document that is a work of fiction. And until financial reform takes this into account, it won't work. And this is an issue that's not currently part of the debate. It's not on the table. It hasn't been discussed much. And I want to try to persuade you in just a few minutes that it needs to be on the table. And Lynn Turner and I have written a white paper. You can look at all the materials in there. I want to try to make that case to you. This is not just about Citigroup, and it goes back a long time. It actually goes back to before Enron. There's a very good book called Infectious Greed, which a few of you may have written, that traces the history of some of this. Starting in the 1980s, Bankers Trust, Salomon Brothers, Enron, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, Morgan Stanley. We know the story. Now the government of Greece and the United States has the largest off-balance sheet transactions of all. And it's not just about one bank, it's about all of our major financial institutions. It's also about a very large number of swaps and derivatives. So this number here, just to put in context, is roughly the notional value of derivatives. Now, I want to just say one thing. There are a lot of media people here. The industry has been poo-pooing the use of this notional value, but notional value is a common sense value that we should use to describe the size of a market. If you have $100 worth of stock, you say, I have $100 worth of stock. You don't say on a risk-adjusted basis, based on VaR and some normal distribution, I have roughly $3 worth of stock. You say, I have $100 worth of stock. If you borrowed $100 and you made a loan and you put that on your balance sheet, you talk about a $100 transaction. If you do a swap, it's the equivalent of that. It has an asset leg and a liability leg. It's economically equivalent. It's a $100 transaction. This is the size of the derivatives market. This does not appear on balance sheets. Now, how big is $600 trillion? It's a lot of zeros. Let me give you a metaphor. Here's the Earth. The total size of global GDP is about $60 trillion. There's the Earth. Here are off-balance sheet transactions represented as swaps. Here's the universe that we don't know about of other off-balance sheet transactions, some of which we write about that are not captured in the $600 trillion worth of swaps. Fiction. There's been a lot of noise about derivatives and swaps and accounting, and the industry in particular has made the argument that this is much too complex. And one of the reasons that people have shied away from regulatory reform in this area goes back to what Joe Stiglitz opened with so eloquently, which is the lack of information, the lack of understanding in these markets. And the argument is made that this is unique, that this has never happened before. This is exactly the same as what happened in the 1920s and 1930s in terms of financial reform. And so I asked you one question, I gave you one test, I want to give you another test to try to persuade you that the level of financial innovation, apart from the computers in this picture, is exactly the same as it was in the 1920s. What is this a picture of? All right? complicated set of interlacing corporations, related entities, complicated transactions. All right. The beauty of PowerPoint is it's like going to the eye doctor, right? 1 or 2. 1 or 2. Okay. Which one is this? It looks like Citigroup again, right? It looks like Enron. It looks like the Civs and all the complicated transactions we went to. Well, when I put together this slide, I wasn't thinking about today. I was thinking about the 1920s. And here's a picture of the 1920s. And the most notorious fraudster of that era, Ivar Kruger. And I'll recommend another excellent book called The Match King, which covers this era and talks about this man and his transactions. This is a picture of exactly the web of transactions from the 1920s. Complicated off-balance sheet transactions, offshore special purpose entities, swaps, the precursors to today's derivatives. It's not new. And what were the reforms back then? They were focused on disclosures related to this financial complexity. They were focused on making information available to investors. And the twin pillars of the 1930s regulation are exactly the twin pillars that we should be looking to today, which are number 1, disclosure, number 2, enforcement when there's failure to disclose. Here's a nice rubric for you to think about where we are in history. T minus 79. So here's the story of the financial crisis that we just went through in 2008. I mean 1929, when the markets declined very dramatically in the fall, and then recovered by 65% in 2009. I mean 1930, in what leaders called the little bull market that Hoover referred to. Because in 2009, you get the idea, right? We're in 2010 right now. We're in 1931. We're living in 1931. How much financial reform was happening in 1931? There was no appetite for financial reform. There wasn't an event, a transformative event that generated enough popular appeal. Maybe this event today will do that. I don't know. But back in 1931, there wasn't much going on. And the galvanizing event that changed public opinion was this guy, Ivar Kruger, being discovered in his Paris flat with a bullet in the center of his heart. His securities were the most widely held in the world. And it was front page news for a year. And this galvanized Congress to start hearings. And people think about Pecora as being the ultimate in terms of investigators. But he was the 5th in a long line of investigators that uncovered facts first about Ivar Kruger, and then about a whole range of fraudsters that led us to the 33 Act and the 34 Act. And one of the problems today is that we don't have that kind of galvanizing public event that people can look to, some kind of salient event. All right, so I want to leave you with this heartening word, fiction, and a warning sign, which is a reality check that if financial reform doesn't include reforms that would make Citigroups and other major financial institutions' balance sheets look like reality instead of fiction, then financial reform isn't going to work.